Good evening, everybody. Oh, wow. I think this is going to work. I hope you can all hear me. And I just want to welcome you all here this evening, and some of the names I don't recognize, so I will have a little short introduction here. My name is Elizabeth McClellan, and I'm president and founder of Partners for World Health. And I want to welcome all of you here to this celebration of International Women's Day. Last year, Partners for World Health hosted a panel discussion on women and the challenges that we face in the world. And this year we decided to focus in on human trafficking, calling it the silent epidemic, and touch on our work in Bangladesh at the Kandapara brothel in the village of Tangai. So I'm going to start sharing the screen right now. Click new share. No. And get rid of this. Yeah. Okay. And so before I begin, I just want to make sure that I just explain a little bit about what the mission of Partners for World Health is all about. And we are a nonprofit organization based here in Maine that I founded back in 2009. And we have our major headquarters located here in Portland with a big distribution center and a shipping center and 5 other warehouses here in Maine, 1 in Vermont and 1 in Massachusetts, with another one coming online in Massachusetts this year. We collect discarded medical supplies from hospitals and nursing homes, and we reprocess and repackage to ship container loads to the developing world all over Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and South America. And most recently, we are packing as we speak 26 pallets of needed medical supplies that will be air freighted into Poland sometime this weekend to be transported into Ukraine to help those in desperate need. And we will be shipping a container load of more than 28,000 pounds at the end of the month to Ukraine for distribution. PWH has the ability to respond to an international crisis, and we are doing our part to make a difference, and we will continue to do so. Okay, I'm pushing the button. Which here? So to begin with, I want to talk a little bit about what human trafficking is. And it's a persistent global problem affecting millions of people. But it's not just sex trafficking that we're going to talk about. It includes forced and bonded labor, debt bondage among migrant workers, involuntary domestic servitude, child soldiers, forced marriage. A recent beheading you may have heard about of the 17-year-old in Iran who was forced to marry this man at 12 when she escaped, but her father encouraged her to return to Iran. And after being back for a week, her husband beheaded her. It could be a girl forced into prostitution at a truck stop, to a man discovered in a restaurant, stripped of his passport and held against his will. And all of these trafficking victims share one essential experience, and that is the loss of freedom. Human trafficking occurs in all parts of the world, and it affects all kinds of people. Both men and women are trafficked. Women are more often attracted for the sex industry, and there are more than 5.5 million children trafficked worldwide, with a total of 40 million that are being trafficked in our world. And human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. It's bigger than Google, Starbucks, Nike, and the NFL combined. And we only spend about $124 million on fighting it. It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. So most of the common forms of human trafficking, like forced labor, are noted by the International Labor Organization, where about 25% of these victims of forced labor were living outside of their home countries, which show the migration role in human trafficking. If you cannot get a job to support your family at home, then you go somewhere else. For example, in Southeast Asia, many of them head to Europe or to the Middle East. Housemaids from Bangladesh working in Saudi Arabia and being abused. And people are driven by desperation to flee violence, as what has happened in Myanmar with the Rohingya people that fled to Bangladesh. or there could be human rights issues, or just to seek support for their families that they left behind. And they often leave home without paperwork, trust the smugglers who promise to bring them to their desired destination, and to travel to countries where they do not know the language or local context. And these victims of sex trafficking are everywhere, not just in the US, with the largest number, as you can see from this slide, over 11 million people being targeted in South and trafficked in Southeast Asia. And there are many factors that facilitate this, such as poverty, labor shortages, corruption, war, conflict, disasters, resulting in displacement and migration, and of course, organized crime. And these modern slaves are not held by chains, but instead they are held by the slave owners. And they are used, they've held by the slave owners by violent forces, fraud, and torture, and psychological coercion. Oops. Okay, so I want to mention a little bit about what happens in the United States. Over 40 million people are trafficked globally, and at least 5.5 million, as I mentioned, are children. And there's an organization called endtrafficking.org that notes that at least 17,000 of those children are from the United States. And you can see from this slide that the children are young and involved in the sex trade between 12 to 14 years old. And over 5 million of them are being forced into early marriages, sold off to older men in developing countries, and basically being paid for so that funds can be used to support their families. So I want to mention also that sex trafficking is the illegal trafficking of humans for sexual exploitation. But if you can see on this slide, the sexual exploitation involves 96% are women and children, and forced labor, however, is 63% in that category are involving men and boys. And then organ removal, 82% of the people that are trafficked for this are predominantly men and boys. So this is definitely a crisis. There are 150 countries in the world that have laws against sex trafficking, but in most countries it's still widely legal and socially acceptable. And so this map shows you some of the high level places of trafficking, human trafficking that are going on in the world. And tier 1, which represents the green parts of Australia, Europe, and North America, means that the government has made exceptional efforts to control sexual or human trafficking. If you look, however, at tier 2 and tier 3, you'll notice that tier 3 is the bright red part, which is Saudi Arabia. Look at South Sudan and Congo in Africa, and then up into Iran and into the Middle East, and then over on the right where Myanmar, that bright red star is, but next to that is also Bangladesh. So if you see the bright darker orange, those are areas in the world where countries have not even met the minimum standards, and they have not made any attempt to do so. And those big black, red areas like Congo, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, they're way behind when it comes to implementing efforts to control sex trafficking in their countries. This is a picture that we took in 2013 at the Kandapar brothel in Tangai, Bangladesh. We visited the brothel there and had a tour, and we had the opportunity to meet the madams of the brothel. And this Tangai brothel is one of the oldest brothels in Bangladesh. There are 11 brothels. It's an Islamic country, and the sex work and sex industry is legal and requires registration with the police department. During our meeting with the madams, and these are the madams that I'm showing you here, we discussed their healthcare needs and what they would like us to do to help them in the brothel, because they have such challenges going to the hospital. They are scrutinized and they're treated disrespectfully, and they were very interested in primary care services. So we said, sure. The next year we went back and we set up a primary care service in the brothel, and we've been back every year until March 2020 due to the pandemic. And we're very excited now to be able to return to the brothel when we leave on Thursday, and we'll be there all next week providing primary care services to the brothel ladies, which will include STD education and training, as well as hypertension screening and diabetic screening, et cetera. We are also in partnership with USM, and Suzanne Parkman, a nursing professor, will join us to perform the beginnings of a qualitative research project in the brothel. Having not seen these women for 3 years, I am really excited about going back. And it'll be very interesting to see what has happened during this time period and who is still in the brothel. So this is a photo on the across the street looking down on top of the brothel, which is like the size of a football field with many different entrances with these metal roofs. And if you look at the picture on the left, which looks like a red kind of reddish roof, that's actually the area where we have hold our primary care clinic. Bangladesh is one of the few Muslim countries in the world where prostitution is legal. And the Kandapara brothel is the oldest, as I mentioned, and the second largest in the country, with about 700 to 800 sex workers. It's existed for more than 150 years, and it was demolished in 2014 when the landlord gave them 24-hour notice and told them, all the sex workers, that they had to leave. And many of the women were born there and they grew up there and they didn't know where else to go when it disappeared. And supporters of the brothel believe that sex workers also work, and that these women in reality do not want to do anything else, but that's not necessarily true. The women themselves demonstrated because of this eviction and for their rights as workers. And so at the end of 2014, the Bangladesh National Women Lawyers Association convinced the High Court that the eviction of the sex workers was an illegal act, and the sex workers quickly returned to their homes. Today, the area's brothel district is surrounded by a big wall, and then inside there are narrow streets full of food stalls and tea shops and street vendors. The brothel is a place where it has its own rules and its own hierarchies of power, which are completely different from mainstream society. For example, inside the brothels, the women are weak, but they're also very powerful. And the most vulnerable stage is when a sex worker enters the brothel. She's called a bonded girl, and they're usually between the ages of 12 to 14 years old. They come from poor families, and they are often victims of trafficking. They have no freedom and no rights. They belong to a madam, they have debts, and they're not allowed to go outside or keep any of their money. When they have paid off all of their debts, which takes sometimes between 1 to 5 years, they become independent sex workers. And then they can refuse customers, keep their own money. From the moment that a woman has paid her debts, she is free to leave the brothel. But these women are so socially stigmatized outside of their homes, and thus have chosen to stay and continue to support their families if they have children and other family members with their earnings. One of the many entrances into the brothel looks very similar to this, where many of the women will sit at the corner, kind of hang out and wait for a customer. And the brothel is frequented by the local population. This is not a brothel where you would see tourists coming at all. So these are similar. This little alleyway is the alleyway where you see little doors, and they each have a room with bamboo sides and a metal roof. There's no bathroom. It's located at the end of the alleyway with no shower. They don't have a kitchen, so they cook on little hibachis out in this little alleyway. Each woman gets her own room, but they have to pay rent and they have to pay part of the electric bill. There are many long rows meandering through this huge space, and the rent and the electric rent that they have to pay goes to the madams. And they, all sex workers remember the horror of taking their first client, especially when they were little kids. First, there is torture to make the girls comply, and then the first encounter. And another issue that's common is a drug that's given to young girls and women called Orodex, which is usually given to cows to increase production of milk, and it's a corticosteroid drug. And what it does is that it causes you to gain weight and look plump, and therefore look healthier and more attractive in their culture. So that's another big challenge, is the use of drugs and other other issues in the brothel. So sex employees in Bangladesh are really not treated like regular residents. They don't have any freedom or really any rights. And as recent as 10 years ago, women could not go outside of the brothel with sandals on, and they had to wear their saris on the other side. They needed to be identified as sex workers, and so living outside the brothel was really challenging. These women live in difficult situations, and most of them are in sex work out of desperation, not necessarily out of choice. Some have been born in the brothel, some have been trafficked in from India, Nepal, Bangladesh itself. The girls sold in the sex trade, as I mentioned, are from very poor families. Many times they're tricked with promises of a good job or just a meal if they're sitting out on the side of the road. And underage girls are always bonded to madams, and they're tortured with emotional blackmailing, like telling them that their families no longer want them, and they use all these negative comments to break these girls down. And they arrange for the underage girl to get them registered as sex workers with the local police, and the local police also get a cut of the action. Many of them have no secure housing on the street, and some of them have been living on the streets for a long time. So they're not able to give their children a decent education if they do have children. And as you can see here, this is the courtyard where we actually hold our primary care service. And what we're doing here is providing an educational opportunity to the mothers. The sex workers earn their own money, but there's no formal system through which they can accumulate any savings or borrow credit. They're not easily able to access the mainstream financial services because of the stigma attached to their occupation. And they also lack any relevant documentation. They may not even have their birth certificate, and their children, if they take the children out of the hospital, then they don't register them, then the child doesn't have a birth certificate as well. So this is just a little street inside, walkway inside of the brothel. And the brothel is like a city within a city. And in the narrow streets, there are food stalls and people selling different things, and spending time in the brothel and watching life unfold is in a way like any other city, with its own rules and its unspoken guidelines. The women of most brothels throughout our world really are treated like dirt in broad daylight. Because of their profession, they face hate and violence in everyday life. Even in the 21st century, talking about sex is still considered a taboo or a bad word. And so it's not surprising that the sex workers are methodically ostracized by society. Sex workers carry this unbearable and unjust burden of social stigma around their necks for their whole lives, and they are considered dirty, loose women by society. In 2004, as I mentioned, that eviction of all the sex workers, they all had to leave. They eventually came back, and one of this is an example of another side street in Tangai where people will walk down the street, and then there'll be these little alleyways in this brothel where people will head to their homes. And then the other one is a photograph. It looks like it's the photograph of actually a hairdresser. So they have all these different types of little businesses going on within the brothel as well. And one of the biggest challenges I find in the brothel is the elderly. And this is an elderly lady that was born in the brothel, never had any children, but has lived in the brothel her entire life. And she's actually never been out of Tangai and never been out of her country. So the only thing she knows is the brothel. And if you look at her, she's really quite lovely. And she doesn't have any money. She doesn't have a source of an income. So what she does is she babysits and she cooks for others so that she can just try to survive. She's a very fascinating lady. And this picture was taken in 2019, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to see her when I go back again. So we want to transition a little bit here to talk about some of the work that David Wright has done for Partners for World Health. David Wright is a well-known international photographer who's worked for CNN and Discovery and traveled all over the world. He captured portraits of women in the Kandapara brothel with their permission during PWH's last medical mission to Bangladesh in 2019. David worked with our interpreter, Kadeza, and together they captured the life histories of many of the sex workers. He chose black and white as his medium to focus entirely on the women and not letting the vibrant colors of traditional Bangladeshi clothing and the women's makeup and the dynamic environment of the brothel steal the spotlight. We have changed the names of these women shown in the photographs to protect their privacy, but the ages and personal stories are accurate to their telling. So this is Pandya, who's probably between the ages of 35 and 40, and she was sold by her housekeeper's son after he told her that they were going on a walk when she was about 11 years old. Pandya attended school until the third grade, and she states that she wants to leave the brothel and use a sewing machine in order to make some embroidery, but she worries about raising her 13-year-old son who lives with her parents. Boys that are born in the brothel usually leave to live elsewhere when they are school age. Many mothers will send their boys to live with their parents, and the woman hides their work from their parents, only sending money home for the children without ever explaining to her parents or their family where the money came from or what she's doing for work. This is Ava. Ava is 23, and she was born in the brothel. She has a fourth grade education, but she left school to work in the brothel when she started menstruating. She's been pregnant twice, and she has aborted each of her pregnancies. And she definitely would like to leave the brothel because of all of the stigma that's attached to it. On a regular basis, she sends money to her mother, who recently was married. Instead of working at the brothel, she'd really like to work in the garment industry in some domestic work. In 2019, I met this woman. She actually speaks a little bit of English, and I asked her with an interpreter if she would be interested in opportunities outside the brothel to learn a new vocation. And as with a few other sex workers who expressed interest in changing the direction of their lives, and so the Rising Up project was born. And we'll talk more about this project later on this evening. Putul is 40 years old, and she was born in the brothel. She says that her work in the brothel began when she was 7. She says it was her own decision to become a sex worker and that the decision was really related to poverty. She could read, but she only went to school until the 4th grade. She has an average of 1 to 2 clients a day, and she makes sure that they use condoms. She doesn't drink or take drugs. She has been tested for HIV, and she is negative. And she wishes she could find a job as a domestic worker and leave the brothel. A comment here about HIV. One of the NGOs came through the Tangai Clinic about 5 years ago and tested everybody for HIV. So they understand, the sex workers understand what HIV is, and they know whether they're positive or negative. Condoms are a big deal, and they say to them, especially the older sex workers, no condom, no sex. But what happens many times with the younger ones is that they're not able to speak up, and if a man just says no to the condoms, they usually will have a sexual encounter without it, which is really too bad because they end up with a lot of STDs. Another comment here are drinking and drugs. There are a lot of drugs in the brothel, and there's a lot of moonshine that's being made, which is creating a big problem because of the alcoholism and people just drinking too much. Jobita is 45. She was 10. When she was 10, she became lost in the city and she was brought to the brothel. 2 years later, her parents found her working in the brothel, but Jobita had become pregnant. She has been pregnant 3 times. She had 1 abortion and she has 2 children who go to school. She would like to leave the brothel and do some housework. Chisa is 19. Her mother was a sex worker. So Chisa has grown up in the brothel. She started her own career as a sex worker when she started her first period at age 11. She'd like to leave the brothel and become a beautician. We mentioned multiple times how these women's mothers were also sex workers. This means that the mother raised her female children in the brothel and then put them into the sex worker when they began menstruating or around that time. And this is often a retirement package for the mothers, as they have become undesired in their older age and are no longer able to earn money. And this happens to a woman in her late 20s and early 30s. And this perpetuates the whole cycle of sex work and poverty within families. Sultana is 25 and she was born in the brothel. Again, similar story. Her mother was a sex worker. She's never been to school, so she doesn't know what she could do if she left, but she'd like to leave. She has two sisters, both of whom are sex workers in the brothel. And you can tell from the roundness in her face that she has been one of these sex workers that has taken the drug Orodex, and she has developed all these side effects. Many of the madams suggest the sex workers take this drug. And as I mentioned, it is the steroid that increases the milk production in cows, but it also has significant side effects for women, long-term headaches and rash, and a lot of other kidney problems. Shanine is 45. She was born in the brothel as well, never went to school. She would leave the brothel if she could get other work, but she's not confident that she has any skills, though she would like to try something. If education and training is not provided in the brothel, there's no way out. The only way out is an organization like PWH that would come in and make a commitment to create alternative opportunities for women, which is the goal of the Rising Up project. Mina is 36, and she was sold into the sex trade by her neighbor at 14. She's been pregnant 5 times. She's had 4 abortions, and she birthed 1 daughter who is educated and married. She continues to help her daughter financially, and Maya would like to leave the brothel and do some domestic work. I've not met this woman. David had the opportunity to meet her, but I'm going to find her. In fact, all of these photographs that we're sharing with you tonight, we're taking with us to Bangladesh. And that's one way to open the door, is to walk down these alleyways and show the photograph, and they will take me to these people. So it'll be a great way to find out what's been going on for the last 3 years. Okay, I went too fast. Oh, sorry. Okay, yep. There we go. So this is Tia and Pika, and they are a mother-daughter team in the brothel, as you can see. Both were born in the brothel, and the daughter was taken from school at grade 4 and became a sex worker in the Tangai brothel. And even though the black and white lens, you can see, even though we're looking through that black and white lens, you can see that the daughter is adorned with jewelry and special clothing and makeup, so that she looks a lot older than what she is. Mira is 60, and she never went to school before marrying her husband at age 18. And after her husband died, she willingly came to the brothel because she had no means of making any money. And she has continued to live in the brothel for over 35 years. She works in a shop. She's not a sex worker. She has 2 children, a 30-year-old son who lives with her in the brothel, and a 40-year-old daughter who willingly works in the brothel and helps her mother out financially. So this woman has a very interesting story. She was born in the brothel where she gave birth, and after she grew up, she became a sex worker, and she eventually became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. She educated her son, and when he graduated from high school, she told her son that she wanted to have another baby because she wanted to have a daughter. And her son was furious because he knew that the daughter would mean that she would put this child into the brothel as a sex worker. So he stopped supporting his mother financially. As the story goes, another woman in the Tangai village delivered a baby girl. And this woman, pictured here, purchased from that woman this little baby at 2 weeks old. And showed this girl that you're seeing now, this picture was taken in 2019. She brought this girl up as her daughter. And at that point in time, I don't think the girl understood that this was not her real mother. This picture, she would, when the landlord evicted the brothel in 2014 that I mentioned earlier, this couple, she and her daughter, never came back to the brothel, and they live about 4 to 5 hours away, and she's selling chickens the last time that I heard in 2019. Word travels fast when PWH comes back to the brothel. And so she came down to see us, and that's how I saw them this time and was able to capture this photograph. And when we visit this year, this girl should be about 14 years old. When I met her, she was, it was about 7. And we're really interested to see if she's still in school, or if she's been put into the sex industry. And you know, when you think about this, no mother wants to put their daughter into the sex industry, but because of poverty and the lack of a job opportunity, many instances, they just have no choice. But no mother really wants to do this. Here is Cynthia again in 2019. This is one of my favorite madams who was born in the brothel, and she owns several of the small little houses on the alleyway, and the women have to pay rent and electricity to her. And she walks through the brothel with a stick, and if someone is misbehaving, she'll use the stick to keep people in line. And she's in total control of the brothel, and nothing gets by her. She's not a sex worker anymore because she makes money renting the space out. And she lives off of the money that she obtains from the bonded girls and the women. In general, if madams have children, they have made enough money so they can send them off-site to live with a caretaker and go to school. And sometimes the madams don't even live in the brothel anymore because they've made so much money, and they can leave, and they can only come back to the brothel during the day because that's their workplace. For example, that elderly lady that you saw the picture earlier, she's not in the same situation as this madam because she doesn't have a place to live and doesn't have enough food because she doesn't have any money. So many instances, the brothel ladies will help many of the elderly people out. But it is very sad because we think of our elderly and how we take care of everyone here in this country. And yet at the same time, no one's taking care of the elderly, especially those in the brothel in Bangladesh. So this is the story of 2 of the 3 sisters in the brothel. And pictured here is the youngest and the oldest. Their mother was a drug addict and had 3 pregnancies, all daughters, and she died of a drug overdose, leaving the girls with nothing. And all 3 of the sisters ended up in the sex industry at a very young age. After discussion with them about some opportunities that PWH could provide, they were very interested in participating in our Rising Up project. The oldest one has wanted to leave the brothel for some time, and she's the one sitting there on the top step. However, she's 27 years old in 2019, but she would not go without going with her sisters. She wants another path for her life. And we're very interested to see if the family of 3 sisters are still there. Shamali. Shamali is a young girl that I first met in 2013. And she was about 11 years old then. And she is now 17 or 18. And she's an active sex worker. This is a picture of Shamali in 2019 with her mother. And her mother is less than 50, probably in her 40s. And she has become very challenged in the last several years because she's become addicted to drugs and alcohol. So I want to go, this picture of Shamali is in this is when she was about 11 or 12 years old. And you can tell that this is a really little girl that's being put into the sex industry, and this is her mother. And if you, right here. Okay, so if you look at that picture of the mother and Shamali, and then you look at this was the first, so this would have been in 2013, and going backwards, oops, you can see the difference of the struggle that's happened. I mean, the life for her mother has really been an issue for Shamli's mother in the brothel. It's been very challenging. And David Wright's photographs really capture these women at one particular point in time, but they have shared experiences that cover a lifetime. And so I want to share some of these pictures of Shamli as years go by for her. Like back in 2013, just when she was about to enter the sex industry, and she's standing out there just for that purpose, to find someone. And looking at these photographs, you can see the whole struggle of life that's etched on many of these women's faces. And it's not an easy world. Here's Shamli again in 2018 on the left with her friend. And then in 2019, you can see Shamli and her friend again. And Shamli and her friend, but the friend this time has a young baby boy. And the photographs don't really depict the true reality, because the smiling photographs doesn't really show the struggles of these women that they've had to undergo as young adults in a brothel with children. I mean, she's a child that just had a baby. So it's really, really a challenge. In this situation, this is a mother-daughter team as well, taken in 2013. You can see the lady, the mother, with the blue wrap button on. We pass out the blue wrap buttons, the BBC, the blue button for commitment, and we give them to people, and we talk to them about the fact that we're coming back. And that's one of the things that the people in the brothel really respect, is that we're one of the only organizations that has been coming back after all of these years. So they're pretty excited to have heard that we are coming back this time. This mother was born in the brothel, and her daughter was put in the sex industry when she was 14. She became pregnant. I'm not exactly sure when, but she had to have delivered her baby around 2018. And when I returned to walk around the brothel in 2019, showing this photograph, I was told that she delivered the baby in the brothel and she succumbed to complications of pregnancy, and she bled to death in the brothel. That wouldn't have happened, more than likely wouldn't have happened, if she had been able to go to the hospital. The woman here is in 2013 at the age of 23 now. This was 2013 with her newborn child. She was married off at 17. And after 1 year of being married, she had been beaten by her husband so many times that she left and tried to find work elsewhere. But she ended up in the brothel when she was 20. The baby that she had was born in the brothel with this significant cleft palate. Working together with a social service agency in Bangladesh, when we saw her in 2013, we were able to secure corrective surgery for this child about 6 months later with the group that is one of our partners. This child lives with the woman's parents, and her parents don't know that she's actually working in the brothel. But the money she makes, she sends home to her parents so that she can help take care of her child. These are the three sisters, again in 2019, and they're all eager to go and participate in the Rising Up project with Partners for World Health to change the direction of their lives. And you can see that the girl in the middle sister, already had a baby and a baby girl. So I'm really going to look forward to seeing them in next week when we arrive in Bangladesh. So despite all of this and all of these challenges, these women are very confident. They're very vibrant, and they are definitely in control of what they can control. We've seen a generational shift since first arriving at the brothel. Many of the women with young children are now adamant that their children will not perpetuate the cycle of sex work. They are paying for their schooling so that they can have a full education and therefore enjoy the options and the opportunities that they didn't have as young people. As Bangladesh shifts its perception of sex workers, they can now wear shoes outside of the brothel and traditional saris in public, and they can come and go from the brothel as they choose. They all have a cell phone. That's how they stay connected to their customers, and that connects them to the outside world. And maybe they wouldn't choose this exact life, but they have often escaped other cycles of poverty, abuse, and hard labor. And now they're able to control their work hours, their sex partners as they get older, and their excess money. And they have an amazing support network of women in the brothel that care about each other and help to protect each other. They are making the best of the situation that they're in, all the while intending to provide a different future for their children. Partners for World Health has been inspired by the determination of these women of the Kandapara brothel and has resolved to provide an alternative lifestyle and means of an income to those who seek it. Our plans to begin this work were halted by the pandemic, so we are thrilled to be able to go back to the brothel at the end of this week. And during this visit, we will reconnect with those women who had sought an alternative to their current situation back in 2019, and to identify more who seek the same change. We hope to provide updates on these women throughout next week on our Facebook pages, as well as upon our return with a follow-up PowerPoint presentation. Through the Rising Up project, PWH aims to provide the opportunity for an alternative to women and their children who have been trapped by the cycle of sex work in Bangladesh. At the core of the project, it is a relocation program to a different community where a fresh start is possible and where it is safe. And we seek partnerships with local organizations that work with women and their reentry into society, providing education and training in literacy and trade skills, particularly sewing, and the support system of a strong community. Because Partners for World Health is so focused on sustainability, our plan is to collect discarded saris, many times worn only once by wealthy women, and repurpose them with into accessories like quilts and napkins and placemats and pillow shams and pocketbooks and other items, all to be sold online to the Western world in Europe, Australia, and the United States, and to anyone else who would be interested in purchasing them. The funds generated for the Rising Up project will support the expenses associated with enrollment in education and training programs, plus housing and food costs of the relocated women and education for their children. With the funds these women earn from their new trades, such as sewing, they will gain their financial independence and ultimately graduate from the Rising Up project. This project has been initially funded by a generous donor, and the plan is to kickstart it to the point where it becomes a sustainable social enterprise. And as the project grows, it will become fully independent and sustainable, to be run locally and to act as a replica method for other women to find their independence. I grew up in Camden, Maine, and never in my whole life would I have thought that I would have the opportunity to meet these women on the streets of a brothel in Bangladesh, so far away from my country and my culture and my environment. However, I've learned that all women, no matter where we are in the world or what culture we come from, we all want the same things for our children. We want food on the table, education for our children. We want shelter. We want secure borders. We want their lives to be better than our own. And it doesn't matter if you're a mother in Maine or in a brothel in Bangladesh, we all want the same thing for our children. We do have differences in our lives, but there are so many ways that we are so similar. And so my opportunity to walk down these streets in the brothel continues to remind me that we can all do something in our world to help those in desperate need. We can all have a huge impact, and all you have to do is try. And I hope that many of you will consider supporting our efforts in Bangladesh, and we welcome your involvement with the Rising Up project. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions. Stop sharing. Oh. Ready? Video. Oh, start the video. Hi. It's really interesting experience speaking to so many people out there, but not seeing anyone in the audience. I'm going to love the fact when we're all going to be back in person, when we can have a really great discussion. So I see some new faces here. Donna from Zonta International. Nice to meet you.
Nice to finally meet you too. I tell you, the world of emails, and at least Zoom, we get to see each other, right?
Yes, yes.
So
Sorry.
I was curious, you had mentioned earlier in the presentation that you have some distribution centers in Massachusetts, and that's where I happen to be. So I was curious as to where they are and how I can get people involved there.
Well, we actually don't have a distribution center in Massachusetts yet, but we do have a warehouse in Millbury, Massachusetts, because we pick up at hospitals in Springfield, in Worcester, UMass Medical Center, and several hospitals in the Boston area. So we should talk about this because what's happened in the last week or 10 days because of the Russians invading Ukraine, we have been had a lot of requests and are partnering up with some people in Massachusetts that are helping to ship a tractor trailer load of medical supplies to New Jersey. And that pickup is supposed to happen on Thursday morning from our shipping center here in Portland, Maine, to be trucked down and hopefully to be sent over in an air freight distribution in Poland, and then the Ukrainians will come out and bring it, truck it into Ukraine. So we're putting out a big appeal tomorrow to all of our different hospital partners, asking them to consider making donations more than usual to Partners for World Health so that we can help to support the people of Ukraine in this crisis. This is going to be ongoing, not going to stop anytime soon. And if it does stop, we still have over 2 million refugees that have left their country in the last 10 days heading into Poland and into Hungary. So they're going to have healthcare issues in those countries as well. So we will be sending a 40-foot container of medical supplies, hopefully by the end of March as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for all you're doing, and look forward to learning more. The photographs were sensational, beautifully done.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And Donna, why don't you share a little bit about maybe just a few comments about Zonta International and what they do, because they've been around for a long time. And I think it's definitely something that I want to be involved with in Partners for World Health as well.
Thank you. Yes, Zonta International is an international organization that supports women and girls worldwide through service and advocacy. And we have chapters that are in many 63 different countries. So it's an opportunity to meet and work with women around the world, depending on what their needs are. Coming up this week, the Commission on the Status of Women is taking place in UN, and with lots of virtual trainings and opportunities to meet on that. And the Zonta has been very involved with the UN and different work. So if you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to share that, but you can just Google Zonta International and you'll learn a lot more about the projects that we're involved with. And Partners for World Health is definitely an organization we want to partner with.
Sounds great. We're definitely going to have a chapter. There's going to be a Zonta chapter up here in the state of Maine. So stay tuned, everybody. You're going to learn more about it. I learned about Zonta on a Zoom meeting about 8 months ago with a colleague friend of mine that was in Bangladesh, that was part of the Zonta Dhaka organization in Bangladesh. And so she invited me to this lecture, and that's how I learned all about you. So I'm really glad I found out, and then found out more about it here in the United States. So we have a few questions here. Let me see here. Yep, I see that. Who are the two men in the blue uniforms in this photograph? What photograph was that? The very first one. I'm pretty sure they were policemen.
They were, Elizabeth, they were part of the officers that we had that traveled along with us. So they stayed with us while we were in the brothel.
Yes,
They were lovely.
part of our partners, we partner with various groups in Bangladesh, and one of them is the Rotarian group. And when we go to Tangai, they want to make sure that everybody's safe. So they have some of the policemen there with us. And the brothel can be a pretty violent place, as I mentioned, although these women really love us. So I don't see anything happening to us, to be honest, but you can never be too sure. So it's important wherever we travel on our medical missions that we are safe and that we all stay together. And that's a really big issue. So we're happy to have the policemen join us. Okay. Yes, Janine was also at the brothel that day. Janine Gorman was our nurse practitioner in the brothel. Yep. Okay, I'm just going down here. You can support the Rising Up. Yep. Providing primary care. We are providing primary care. We have nurses with us, and one nurse who is worked in nurse practitioner and have been a longtime nurse at Maine Medical Center. And she and I are going to provide those kinds of services. A lot of the things that you see in the brothel are like hypertension, wound care issues, some infections, but mostly what you see are people that are so depressed and sad. And remember also that they don't speak English, so we have to hire interpreters. So everyone will be with an interpreter and working with them. And this time we're pretty excited because we're taking Annie Dolan, who is also a master's prepared social worker. And we will be doing some work with the talking to them and also working with the nursing school and the hospital staff in their social work department, even to determine if they have a social work department at the Tangai General Hospital. This is a hospital that has 350 beds, but 450 patients. So when you walk in, you're stepping over people that are so sick just on the floor. So it's definitely a lot different than here.
When PWH is not there.
What?
When PWH is not there, who's providing primary care?
Oh, when PWH isn't there. When there's no provision for primary care when PWH doesn't show up. If they get sick, really sick, they have to go to the hospital. And there's a government hospital, the one I just described, of 350 beds. There are private clinics in Tangai, just like there are in many other parts of Bangladesh, but you have to pay money to go. And sometimes, one time I visited a lady in the brothel that was an older lady that was quite sick. And she showed me all the papers that she had for x-rays for this and blood work done for this. And that she basically spent all of the money that she had saved. And there wasn't really anything that was particularly would have changed any treatment other than maybe an exercise program and some Motrin, or some Tylenol to take away the aches and pains. So abuse happens in the healthcare industry as well. When you try to, in many parts of the world where you seek coverage, you seek care, and you have to pay for it, but you don't really understand at that point in time that maybe you don't need all those tests done. And that poor lady didn't need it. And that's right, Janine comments about that they can go to the local pharmacy, and they do that. And the local pharmacy people are people that are not pharmacists, like we know pharmacists here in this country. And so they will share something, tell them the symptoms, and then the pharmacist will pull out a medication and say, well, you should take this medication. There are lots of medications. The majority of the medications are over the counter. Not like here where you go and get an antibiotic, you have to have a prescription to get that. Not over there in Bangladesh. So in some cases, the pharmacy will treat a patient, but not necessarily with the right drugs, because they're not really a pharmacist. They would have only been reading the insert that might have said that this takes care of a breathing issue, when the reality, there could be something significant wrong with the patient. So that's a bit of a challenge. We do have a friend, though, that is in the pharmaceutical business. So if we run out of medications, we go to that particular pharmacy and negotiate a very good deal on drug purchases. So Partners for World Health also runs medical missions, and this is the first medical mission that we are initiating for 2022. And it's the first one that we have done since I came home in January of 2020, when we did our medical mission in Uganda and Somaliland. So, and then the pandemic kicked in, and it's really great to think that we can now have the opportunity to travel again with masks on and lots of other precautions. So we're excited to be able to do this. Other thoughts or questions? Getting back to the Rising Up project, we found 5 women, 3 sisters that I showed you, and Ava also was one of the photographed ladies, and another lady is Mooney. And they have decided in 2019 that they were interested in participating in our Rising Up project. And we had hoped to implement that or to initiate that in 2020. So now it's kind of like starting over, finding out who's still there, finding out if people are still interested in doing this, and then starting this over again. Part of our partners over there, one of the Rotarian clubs, they're very interested in helping to support our project. It's going to cost as a startup for kickstarting this for about a year and a half till we kind of educate people and bring in some money. I would think about $25,000, which is not a lot of money actually when you think about it, because we have to remember we're going to have to bring these people out of the brothel, take them to another area that's far away from the brothel so that they can assimilate into life, and people don't know that their past life was in the sex trade. Provide housing and food, provide education for vocational training. We're going to have to set up a recycling program for saris and get a lot of the wealthy women involved that want to donate their saris that they wore 1 or 2 times, and then they go off and buy some more. And then we have to set up an educational program for them so they can learn how to read and write, and also to learn how to speak English, and to learn how to use the computer and how to run a business model. It's not just a nonprofit. As you've heard, many of you have heard that I strongly believe that to run a nonprofit, you need to run it like a business. And that's something that we want to make sure that we share with the ladies so that they end up with a very viable, sustainable business. And if this works with 5, then we can go back and take some more people out that are interested in participating, so that we could really see this as an opportunity of breaking that cycle of poverty for people. And if we don't do this, then I'm not sure who's going to go in. There might be other groups that are going to go into the brothel and start something up, which is great. I mean, if they can do that, I'm happy I welcome them. But I must say that some of the brothel ladies way back in the beginning have told us that usually people come in, we give them a tour, they say they'll be back, but they never go back. And that's why it's been we've made such a big commitment at Partners for World Health. And the people that have traveled with us before to the brothel know that. They can feel that, they can see that with the ladies, that they are really pleased that we have made this commitment and we keep coming back. So we'd love to have so many of you travel with us and participate in the brothel Bangladesh experience. Janine, would you like to comment on anything?
It was a wonderful experience I'll never forget, and I really wanted to go back with Elizabeth's team this year, but because of some medical issues, I wasn't unable to go. But it's a hard trip, and it's definitely a cultural eye opener. But it was a wonderful time, and hopefully I can go back again sometime, I hope.
Well, they'll miss seeing you. Julie,
Yes.
Julie, would you like to share a thought?
Sure. I'm Julie. I'm the COO here at Partners for World Health, and I had the opportunity to travel with Elizabeth the last time we did go to the brothel 3 years ago. And my daughter, who at the time was a sophomore in college, joined us as well. And we did spend that first week going day after day into the brothel, working with the women there, interviewing them, talking to them, and really and feeling a connection with them. And I think it was very powerful for my then 20-year-old daughter to be talking to women who were of her age or similar ages or even younger, and to hear their stories. And it was, I think, more emotional than she expected, to realize that these women had overcome a lot of adversity in their lives, and that this environment for these women, for many of them, felt safer, felt like home, felt much more empowering to them, that they were making decisions. They may not have made that initial decision to arrive at the brothel, but living in that brothel, they made a life for themselves that included other women, that was very supportive and very uplifting. And I think that was very conflicting in my daughter's mind, to think, how can that be when we know that this is something that we don't want anyone to ever be, you know, forced into having as a life. And I think it took her a while to process that, you know, that this is somebody who was a contemporary of hers in age, but their life experiences are so dramatically different that you have to understand what it means to try and have, you know, as strong a life as you can, given the circumstances around you. So it was a really uplifting experience, as much as it's hard to say. I think it was, we took a lot away from it. I think we engaged deeply with the women. And I think that it's something that I will certainly never forget, the way that they trusted in a way that I never expected that they would, those of us that came from the outside. But there was a real compassion for the work that we were doing, and the care that we gave to them, and it was repaid as well back to us.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Any comments? Well, this is International Women's Day celebration all over the world. There are many different things going on. And we hope to continue this again next year. We did, as I mentioned, we did it the first time last year, and hopefully it'll get bigger and better. And now that COVID requirements are lifting, you know, maybe we might even be able to have a luncheon with a presentation in real life next year on March 8th. So stay tuned, Paul. So we'll see. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. And we'd love to see you down here at Partners for World Health. I see a lot of familiar names up here, that some are our volunteers, but also some new ones. So feel free, if you're interested in learning about Partners for World Health, to go to our website. And there's an application up there for a volunteer application if you're interested in volunteering, or if you just want to come down and have a tour, we'd love to have you. We need to spread the word that we need to save all the stuff that you can imagine that's going to the dump from these hospitals and from these nursing homes and private individuals. We throw away so much every day in our healthcare system, and we can reprocess it, and we can give it away to people who need it. We have a mission. You go, girl. Okay. Well, very nice to meet you all. And I hope to meet you in person. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. Bye.